Lena Marlowe stood on the platform with a cracked suitcase and a fistful of lies. The train had already pulled away, leaving her alone in the brutal Wyoming heat with nothing but a stranger's promises and the sinking realization that Silas Creed, the man who'd written her 3 months of careful letters, wasn't coming. The platform stretched empty in both directions. No wagon, no groom, no welcome, just dust and the weight of every mistake that had led her here. She'd crossed half a country to marry a man who didn't exist, and now she had nowhere left to run. If you're watching from somewhere far from this dusty frontier town, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far Lena's story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll see whether broken promises can lead to something real. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The heat came first. Lena felt it through the thin fabric of her traveling dress, felt it bake into her shoulders and the crown of her head, where her hat had long since lost its ability to provide shade. The Wyoming sun didn't discriminate. It pressed down on everything with the same merciless weight, turning the wooden platform beneath her boots into something that radiated warmth like a stovetop. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes. The train that had carried her from St. Louis was already a distant memory, a smudge of smoke on the eastern horizon. The other passengers, a family of homesteaders, 2 ranch hands, and an elderly woman with a canary in a cage, had been met by people who actually wanted them. They'd climbed into wagons, exchanged embraces, disappeared into the town that spread out beyond the depot like something barely holding itself together against the wind. Lena had waited. She'd smoothed her skirt, adjusted the cameo at her throat, practiced the smile she'd use when Silas Creed finally appeared. She'd imagined it 100 times during the 3-day journey, how he'd look at her with those steady eyes he'd described in his letters, how his voice would sound when he said her name. He'd written that he was tall, broad-shouldered, a man of few words but deep feeling, a rancher who'd built something solid from nothing and needed only a good woman to make it complete. I can offer you safety, he'd written in careful script. A home, a fresh start away from whatever shadows you're running from. No questions asked about the past, only a future we build together. It had sounded like salvation. Now it sounded like the setup for a particularly cruel joke. Lena picked up her suitcase. The leather cracked along one side where she'd dropped it running for a connection in Kansas City, and forced herself to move. Standing on the platform wouldn't change anything. Silas wasn't coming. That much was clear. But maybe he'd sent word. Maybe there was a message waiting at the station office, some explanation that would make sense of this. The depot building was small, weathered gray by wind and sun. Inside, a clerk sat behind a counter that had been worn smooth by decades of elbows. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or pity. "Help you, miss?" "I'm looking for Silas Creed." Lena kept her voice steady. "He was supposed to meet the noon train." The clerk's expression shifted into something more definite. Definitely pity. "You're the one from St. Louis?" "Yes. Is there a message? Did something happen?" Silas left town 3 days ago." The clerk said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. "Took what he could carry and rode out before dawn. Sheriff's been looking for him, but he's long gone by now." The floor didn't move, but Lena felt like it had. "I don't understand." "You're not the first." The clerk's voice was gentle now, apologetic. "4th in 2 years from what I hear. He finds women through those matrimonial advertisements, gets them to come all this way, and then..." He gestured vaguely. "Takes what he can, and disappears." "Takes what?" Lena's voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Money, usually. Jewelry. Whatever they bring with them of value." The clerk glanced at her suitcase. "Did you send him anything before you came?" She had. 2 months ago, when he'd written that the ranch was struggling after a hard winter, that he needed just a small loan to get through until spring calving. She'd sent $70, everything she'd saved from 3 years of work as a seamstress. He'd written back with gratitude and promises, with plans for their wedding and descriptions of the house he was preparing for her arrival. All lies. "I see," Lena heard herself say it from somewhere far away. "Thank you for telling me." She turned before the clerk could offer more sympathy and walked back out into the heat. The platform was still empty. The town beyond it looked like something thrown together in a hurry and never properly finished. Buildings that leaned slightly, streets that were more dust than road, everything bleached pale by the relentless sun. She had $12 left. That was it. $12. A suitcase full of clothes she'd made herself and nowhere to go. She couldn't afford the train fare back to St. Louis. Couldn't afford a room for more than a few nights. Couldn't afford to break down here in public where people would see and remember. So she walked. The main street of Ridgehaven was wider than it needed to be, as if the town founders had imagined something grander than what had actually taken root here. Most of the buildings were false-fronted, trying to look more substantial than they were. A general store, a saloon, a doctor's office with a painted sign that had faded to near illegibility, a church with a steeple that listed slightly to the left. Lena found herself standing outside the general store without quite remembering the decision to enter. Through the window, she could see shelves stocked with dry goods, tools, bolts of fabric. A woman stood behind the counter, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, wearing an apron over a practical calico dress. The bell above the door chimed when Lena pushed inside. The woman looked up, and her expression went through the same progression as the depot clerk's. Recognition, pity, something harder underneath. "You're the St. Louis bride." It wasn't a question. Lena set her suitcase down carefully, buying herself a moment. News travels fast. "In a town this size?" The woman snorted. "Faster than the telegraph. I'm Mabel Crowley. This is my store." She studied Lena with eyes that missed nothing. "You look like you could use some water. And the truth, though I doubt you'll thank me for it. The clerk at the depot already told me Silas is gone." "That's part of the truth." Mabel disappeared through a doorway and returned with a tin cup filled with water. She set it on the counter, waited until Lena had taken a long drink. "The whole truth is uglier. He's done this 4 times now that we know of. Maybe more before he settled in Ridgehaven. Finds women who are desperate enough, or lonely enough, or running from something bad enough that they'll take a chance on a stranger's promises." "You knew." Lena heard the accusation in her own voice. "The whole town knew, and no one thought to warn. How?" Mabel's tone was sharp, but not unkind. "You think we had your address in St. Louis? Think we even knew you existed until you stepped off that train?" She shook her head. "We reported him to the territorial marshal after the second bride. Nothing came of it. Hard to prosecute a man for breaking promises, especially when the women he victimized are too ashamed to testify. They all left town quick as they could. Can't say I blame them." Lena set the cup down before her shaking hands could spill it. "What did he take from them?" "Money from 2, family jewelry from the 3rd. One of them, he convinced her to sell her property back east and bring the proceeds. Cleaned her out of near $300. Mabel's jaw tightened. That one stayed a month before she gave up and left. Kept insisting Silas would come back, that there'd been some mistake. Broke my heart watching her finally understand. Why didn't anyone stop him? Because he's smart about it. Never takes enough to make it worth the law's time. Never leaves physical proof, just promises and letters and women who are too humiliated to fight back." Mabel leaned against the counter. "I wrote to the territorial authorities myself. They wrote back saying civil matters weren't their concern, suggested the victims pursue legal action on their own, which requires money they don't have." "Exactly." Mabel's expression softened slightly. "How much did he get from you?" $70, everything I had." Lena forced herself to meet the other woman's eyes. "I have 12 left. That won't get me back to St. Louis. Won't get me much of anything." "No family you can wire for help?" "No." The word came out flat. Lena had left St. Louis because there was nothing holding her there. No family, no prospects, no future except more of the same grinding poverty and loneliness. She thought Silas's offer was the answer. Instead, it was just a different kind of trap. Mabel was quiet for a moment, studying her. "You have any skills besides sewing?" "I can cook, clean, keep accounts. I worked in a boarding house for 2 years before the seamstress job." Lena straightened her shoulders. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "That's something." Mabel tapped her fingers on the counter, thinking. "Town's always short on domestic help. Most women out here have their own households to manage. If you're willing to take housekeeping work, I can ask around." The door crashed open hard enough to make the bell clatter wildly. A small figure barreled inside. A boy, maybe 7 years old, all skinny limbs and wild dark hair. He wasn't looking where he was going. He was running blind, tears streaming down his face, and he collided with Lena hard enough to nearly knock her sideways. Small arms wrapped around her waist. The boy pressed his face into her dress and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had turned liquid and strange. "Mama," he sobbed. "Mama, I found you. I knew you'd come back." Lena froze. Over the boy's head, she saw Mabel's expression shift into something complicated, surprise and sorrow tangled together. Before either of them could react, the door opened again and a man burst through, breathing hard like he'd been running. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 35. Dark hair that needed cutting, a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't currently carved into lines of exhausted desperation. He saw the boy clinging to Lena and stopped dead, something breaking behind his eyes. "Eli." His voice was rough. "Son, we talked about this." "But she came back." The boy didn't loosen his grip. "I knew she would. I knew Mama wouldn't leave forever." The man, the boy's father, clearly, looked at Lena with an expression that made her chest ache. It was apology and grief and bone-deep weariness all mixed together. "I'm sorry, he doesn't mean—" His voice cracked. "Eli, let go. You're holding a stranger." "She's not a stranger." Eli's voice was muffled against Lena's dress, but the desperation in it was clear. "She looks just like Mama. I remember her face." The man moved closer, his hands hovering near his son's shoulders like he was afraid touching him would make everything worse. "Eli, please. We've been through this." Lena had no idea what to do. The boy was shaking against her, and she could feel the dampness of his tears soaking through the fabric of her dress. Slowly, carefully, she brought one hand up to rest on his shoulder. Just contact. Just acknowledgement that he was there and hurting, and she wasn't pushing him away. "My name is Lena," she said quietly. "What's yours?" The boy tilted his head back to look at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face blotchy from crying. "Eli Hart," he whispered. "Are you really not my mama?" It would have been kinder to lie. Lena could see that clearly, but she'd just had her own life built on lies torn apart, and she couldn't bring herself to add to this child's confusion. "No, sweetheart, I'm not. I'm sorry." Eli's face crumpled. The man, Hart, finally touched his son's shoulders, tried to gently pull him back. "Come on, Eli, we need to go home." "I don't want to go home." Eli wrenched away from his father and grabbed Lena's hand with both of his. "Please don't make me. Please. It's so quiet there and everything's wrong and I can't. Eli. Hart's voice broke completely. He crouched down to his son's level and Lena could see his hands were shaking. "I know it's hard. I know you miss her, but this lady has her own life. We can't just—" "Cole?" Mabel's voice cut through the chaos, gentle but firm. "Take a breath, both of you." Hart, Cole, looked up at Mabel like a drowning man spotting a rope. Mabel came around the counter, moved to Eli's side with the ease of someone who'd dealt with frightened children before. "Eli, honey, I need you to listen to me." She waited until the boy's tear-filled eyes focused on her. "This is Miss Lena. She just arrived in town today. She's had a real hard time, and she could probably use a friend. Do you think you could be her friend?" Eli sniffled, glanced up at Lena. "A friend?" "That's right." Mabel kept her voice steady, calm. "Friends help each other, and right now, Miss Lena needs some help figuring out where she's going to stay and what she's going to do. Your pa's good at helping people. Maybe you two could talk about it?" Cole straightened slowly, and Lena saw him mouth "thank you" to Mabel. When he looked at Lena, some of the raw desperation had eased into exhausted resignation. "I apologize for my son, Miss—" He trailed off, realizing he didn't know her full name. "Marlowe. Lena Marlowe." She looked down at Eli, who was still holding her hand but had stopped crying. "It's all right. He didn't hurt anything. He's been—" Cole rubbed his free hand over his face. "His mother passed 8 months ago. Fever. She went fast, and he was so young when she got sick that I think part of him doesn't quite believe she's gone. He keeps thinking if he looks hard enough, searches the right places, he'll find her." The pain in those words was so raw that Lena had to look away. She understood grief. She'd lost her own mother at 15, her father 2 years later. But she'd never seen a child this young trying to navigate that kind of loss. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. Cole nodded, not trusting his voice. Eli had gone very still, very quiet. He was staring at Lena's hand where it rested on his shoulder, just looking at it like he was trying to memorize something. Mabel cleared her throat. Cole, Miss Marlowe here is looking for work, housekeeping, cooking, that sort of thing. You've been managing on your own out at the ranch for months now. Might be you could use some help. Cole's head snapped up. Mabel, just think about it. Mabel's tone was brisk, practical. You've got that extra room in the house, the one Sarah used for sewing. Miss Marlowe needs somewhere to stay and work to keep her fed. Seems like it could solve two problems at once. I couldn't, Lena shook her head. I don't want to impose. You'd be working for your keep, Mabel interrupted. That's not imposing. That's employment. She looked at Cole. Unless you've suddenly got everything under control out there. Cole's jaw worked. Lena could see him weighing options, calculating risks, trying to figure out if this was kindness or madness. Finally, he looked at Eli. What do you think, son? Should we ask Miss Marlowe if she'd like to come stay at the ranch for a while? Eli's whole face lit up. Yes. Yes, please. Can we? I don't know anything about ranching, Lena said quickly. I've never even been on a farm. I wouldn't know the first thing about... I'm not asking you to run cattle. Cole's voice was steady now, taking on the tone of a man making a business arrangement. Just basic housekeeping, cooking, keeping the place from falling apart completely. I can pay you. He paused, calculating. $5 a week plus room and board. It's not much, but it's more than fair. Lena's mind was racing. $5 a week meant in 3 months she'd have enough for train fare back east. Maybe enough for a fresh start somewhere else, somewhere without the stain of Silas Creed's con. But I should be clear, I came to Ridgehaven because I was supposed to marry a man named Silas Creed. He's the reason I'm stranded here. If that's going to be a problem, Silas is everyone's problem, Cole said grimly. And you're one more person he hurt. That's not your fault. He held out his hand. So, do we have an arrangement? Lena looked at his hand, work roughened, steady despite everything. She looked at Eli, who was watching her with desperate hope. She thought about the $12 in her pocket and the complete absence of better options. She shook Cole's hand. We have an arrangement. The wagon ride to the ranch took 40 minutes. Cole drove, his hands loose and easy on the reins despite the tension in his shoulders. Eli sat between them, pressed against Lena's side like he was afraid she'd disappear if he didn't maintain contact. He didn't talk much, but every few minutes he'd sneak a glance up at her, checking to make sure she was still there. The land rolled out in all directions, vast and empty and beautiful, in a harsh kind of way. Sagebrush and bunch grass, distant mountains that looked blue in the afternoon light. Everything smelled like dust and sage, and something green underneath it all, some stubborn growing thing that refused to quit despite the heat. It's 6 miles from town, Cole said, breaking the silence. Not too far, but far enough that you'll want to let me know if you need supplies. I make the trip in once a week, usually. All right. Lena kept her voice neutral, professional. This was a job. Nothing more. A temporary arrangement that would give her time to figure out what came next. The house isn't fancy, Cole continued. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a main room. There's a root cellar and a smokehouse out back, barns about 50 yards from the house. We've got 20 head of cattle, some chickens, 2 horses besides these. He gestured at the team pulling the wagon. Most of my time goes to keeping things running. Haven't had much left over for... He trailed off. For keeping house, Lena finished. Yeah. They lapsed back into silence. Eli's head was getting heavy against Lena's arm, his breathing evening out. The boy was exhausted, she realized. Probably hadn't been sleeping well since his mother died. The ranch appeared gradually. First the barn, then the house, both weathered but solid-looking, fences that needed mending, a vegetable garden that had mostly gone to weeds, chickens scratching in the yard. It looked like exactly what it was, a place that had been neglected by people too grief-stricken to maintain it properly. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down. He reached up for Eli, who woke just enough to be transferred, then offered Lena a hand. She took it, let him help her down, then grabbed her suitcase before he could. I'll show you the room, Cole said. Then maybe you could look at the kitchen? I've been keeping us fed, but it's been pretty basic. Eli's not eating much, and I think part of it is I'm a terrible cook. I can manage a kitchen. Lena followed him inside. The house was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. The main room was sparsely furnished, a table, some chairs, a wood stove. Everything was clean but dusty, like someone had given up on the details months ago. A door on the left stood open, revealing a bedroom with a large bed and clothes hung on pegs. On the right, another door. Cole pushed it open. This was Sarah's sewing room. It was small but not cramped, a single bed frame with a bare mattress, a trunk at the foot of the bed, a small table beneath the window with a chair tucked under it. The window looked out toward the mountains, and the light coming through it was golden. "There's bedding in the trunk," Cole said. "Should be everything you need. If there's anything else—" "This is fine," Lena set her suitcase down carefully. "Thank you." Cole nodded, already retreating toward the door. "I'll leave you to settle in. Kitchen's through the main room. Help yourself to whatever's there." He paused. "And Miss Marlowe? Thank you for doing this. I know it's not ideal." "Neither is being stranded in a strange town with $12, Lena said. "We're helping each other. That makes it fair." Something shifted in Cole's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "Fair," he repeated. "All right, then." He left, and Lena sat down on the edge of the bare mattress. Through the window, she could see Cole and Eli crossing the yard toward the barn. Eli's small hand swallowed up in his father's larger one. The mountains beyond were going purple in the late afternoon light. She'd come west looking for safety and found catastrophe instead. But maybe, just maybe, she'd also found a way forward. Lena stood, opened the trunk, and started making the bed. The kitchen told its own story of neglect and grief. Lena stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking inventory. The cast iron stove was functional but hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Grease spatters darkened the surface, and ash had drifted onto the floor around it. The counter held a stack of dirty dishes that Cole had apparently given up on, and the cupboards, when she opened them, revealed supplies that had been shoved in without any organization. Flour sacks sat next to tins of coffee, beans mixed with what looked like dried apples, everything coated in a fine layer of dust. But beneath the chaos, the bones were good. Someone, Sarah, probably, had set this kitchen up with care. There were proper pots hanging from hooks, a good Dutch oven, measuring cups arranged by size on a shelf. A window over the dry sink let in western light, and when Lena looked out it, she could see the vegetable garden struggling against the weeds. She rolled up her sleeves. The pump at the sink was stiff from disuse, but she worked the handle until water came sputtering out, rust-colored at first and then clear. She found a bar of lye soap, a scrub brush, and got to work on the dishes. The physical labor felt good after 3 days of sitting on trains, after the shock of the empty platform and the weight of understanding how thoroughly she'd been fooled. She was elbow-deep in soapy water when she heard footsteps behind her. "You don't have to do that tonight." Cole stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. "You just got here. You should rest." "I'm not tired." Lena scrubbed at a particularly stubborn pot. "And this needs doing. Might as well start now." Cole shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I know it's bad. I kept meaning to. I just couldn't seem to." He stopped, frustrated with himself. Lena set the pot aside and turned to face him properly. "Mr. Hart, I'm not here to judge how you've managed. I'm here to help manage it going forward, that's all." "Cole," he said quietly, "if you're going to be living here, working here, you should call me Cole." "All right, Cole." She picked up another plate. "Is Eli settled?" "He's in bed. Asked for you about 6 times before he'd agree to sleep." Cole rubbed the back of his neck. "I should warn you, he's going to get attached. Probably already is, and I don't know how to—" He trailed off, staring at his boots. "How to protect him from more loss," Lena finished. Cole's head came up, something raw in his eyes. "Yeah." "I'm not planning to disappear in the night," Lena said carefully. "This is an honest arrangement. I'll work, you'll pay me, and when I've saved enough to figure out what comes next, I'll give you proper notice. That's the best promise I can make." "That's more than fair." Cole set his hat on the table. "I'll make sure Eli understands it's temporary, that you're here to work, not to replace. I couldn't replace his mother even if I wanted to." Lena's voice was gentle but firm. "No one can. But maybe I can be someone steady while he's figuring out how to live without her." Cole looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. Finally, he nodded. "I'll let you get back to it. If you need anything, I'm just across the hall." He left, and Lena returned to the dishes. Outside, the sun was sinking toward the mountains, painting everything gold and orange. The water in the basin had gone cool, and her hands were starting to prune, but she kept working. There was something soothing about the simple repetition of it. Wash, rinse, stack, making order from chaos, creating something clean from something neglected. By the time she finished, full dark had fallen. She dried her hands on a towel that had probably been white once, banked the fire in the stove, and made her way back to her small room. The bedding she'd found in the trunk smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. Sarah's scent, probably, preserved in the careful storage. She made the bed quickly, changed into her nightgown, and lay down. Sleep should have come easily. She was exhausted, wrung out from travel and shock and the strange unreality of everything that had happened since she'd stepped off that train. But instead, she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. Wind in the eaves, the distant call of a nightbird, the creak of the house settling, and once, very faintly, the sound of a man's voice murmuring something soft and broken in the next room. Cole, probably, talking to himself or to his son or to the ghost of the woman who'd left them both behind. Lena closed her eyes and tried not to think about the fact that she was now living in a dead woman's house, sleeping in her bedding, taking over her kitchen. Tried not to think about the little boy who'd looked at her with such desperate hope, or the father who carried his grief like a physical weight. This was just work, just a temporary stop on the way to somewhere else. She repeated it to herself until exhaustion finally pulled her under. Morning came early. Lena woke to pale light filtering through her window and the sound of roosters crowing. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed was wrong, the light was wrong. Everything smelled like sage and dust instead of the coal smoke and damp of St. Louis. Then memory crashed back in, and she sat up, orienting herself. The house was quiet. She dressed quickly in one of her practical work dresses, pinned her hair up, and ventured out into the main room. Cole and Eli's bedroom door was still closed, but she could hear movement from the barn. Cole was already up and working. The kitchen looked better in morning light, though it still needed a thorough scrubbing. Lena got the stove going, found the coffee, actual good coffee, not the chicory-cut stuff she'd been drinking in St. Louis, and put a pot on to boil. While it heated, she investigated the pantry more thoroughly. Whoever had stocked it last, probably Cole, making do, had focused on basics: flour, cornmeal, beans, rice, salt pork, some dried fruit. Not much in the way of fresh anything, though there were eggs from the chickens and what looked like a crock of butter in the coolest corner. She could work with this. By the time Cole came in from the barn, she had coffee ready, eggs frying, and biscuits in the oven. He stopped in the doorway, staring. "You didn't have to—" "I'm the housekeeper," Lena interrupted. "This is the work. Sit down before it gets cold." Cole sat, moving like a man not quite sure what to do with himself. Lena poured him coffee, set a plate in front of him, and pulled the biscuits from the oven just as they were turning golden. She split two, buttered them, and added them to his plate. "Eli still sleeping?" she asked. "Yeah, he usually doesn't get up until—" Cole paused as the bedroom door opened and Eli shuffled out, hair sticking up in all directions, rubbing his eyes. The boy froze when he saw Lena. For a moment she thought he might start crying again, might have another one of those terrible moments of confusion. But instead his face broke into a shy smile. "You're still here," he said softly. "I told you I would be." Lena pulled out a chair. "Come sit down. I made breakfast." Eli climbed into the chair, his feet dangling well above the floor. Lena set a smaller portion in front of him and watched as he picked up a biscuit, examining it carefully before taking a tiny bite. His eyes went wide. "This is good." "Thank you." Lena poured milk for him. There was a pitcher in the cooler, fresh from this morning's milking. "Eat what you can. No pressure to finish if you're not hungry." But Eli was hungry, apparently. He worked his way through the eggs and one biscuit and was eyeing a second when Cole spoke. "What do you say, Eli?" "Thank you, Miss Lena." Eli's voice was small but sincere. "You're welcome." Lena started clearing plates, but Cole stopped her. "Let me. You cooked." He stood, collecting dishes. "Eli, why don't you show Miss Lena around the ranch? She should know where everything is." Eli's face lit up. "Can I show her the chickens, and the barn, and the place where the creek bends?" "Chickens and barn, yes. Creek can wait until it's not so hot." Cole glanced at Lena. "If that's all right with you." "That's fine." Lena smiled at Eli. "Lead the way." The boy was out of his chair in an instant, grabbing her hand and tugging her toward the door. Cole called after them, "Don't let him tire you out too much, But Lena was already being pulled into the bright morning sunlight. The ranch looked different in daylight, less haunted, more just worn down. Eli took his tour guide duties seriously, showing her the chicken coop where 6 hens scratched and fussed, the barn where 2 draft horses regarded them with patient eyes, the equipment shed where tools hung on pegs in surprisingly good order. "Papa says we got to keep the tools right," Eli explained, repeating what was clearly Cole's teaching. "If you don't, you can't find them when you need them." Smart advice. Lena let him lead her around the side of the barn to where a small pen held nothing at all. "What goes here?" "We used to have pigs." Eli's voice went quiet. "But Mama got sick and Papa had to take care of her and me, and the pigs got out. We never found them." "I see." Lena squeezed his hand gently. "That must have been hard." "Everything got hard." Eli kicked at a rock. "Papa tries, but he can't do everything. He gets so tired. And I try to help, but I'm too little for most stuff." The honesty in it was heartbreaking. Lena crouched down so she was at Eli's eye level. "You're not too little to be kind to your papa. And you're not too little to keep trying, even when things are hard. That's actually very grown-up work." Eli considered this seriously. "Are you going to help make things less hard?" "I'm going to try." Lena stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "But I'll need your help too. Think you can show me where everything is in the kitchen? All the places your mama kept things?" "I know where the molasses is," Eli offered. "And the pickles. Mama used to let me have a pickle when I was good." "Then you'll be an excellent guide." Lena let him take her hand again. "Come on, let's go see what else needs doing." The next 3 days passed in a blur of work. Lena tackled the house with systematic determination. She scrubbed the kitchen until the stove gleamed and the counters were clean enough to see her reflection in. She swept and mopped the main room, beat the dust from the rugs, washed windows until they let in clear light. She organized the pantry, made lists of supplies they needed, and started planning meals that would actually stick to Cole's ribs and tempt Eli's reluctant appetite. The garden was beyond saving for this year, too far gone, too choked with weeds. But she pulled what vegetables had managed to survive, found some late squash and a handful of stunted carrots, and worked them into stews and soups. She baked bread every other day, the yeasty smell filling the house and bringing Eli running to watch through the oven door as the loaves rose and browned. Cole watched all of this with something that looked like disbelief. He'd come in for lunch. Lena insisted on a proper midday meal, not just whatever could be eaten standing up, and find the table set, food ready, everything organized in a way it hadn't been for months. He didn't say much, but she caught him looking around sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Grief, maybe, or guilt, or just exhaustion finally easing into something that resembled relief. Eli followed her everywhere. He was too young to be much practical help, but he tried, fetching things she needed, holding doors open, carefully setting the table with the concentration of a child who wanted desperately to be useful. He talked while she worked, a steady stream of chatter about the ranch, about his memories of his mother, about the world as he understood it. "Mama used to sing," he told her one afternoon while she was kneading bread dough. "Not all the time, but when she was happy, Papa says I get my voice from her." "Do you like to sing?" Lena asked. Eli shrugged, suddenly shy. "I don't anymore. It makes Papa sad." Lena's hand stilled in the dough. "Why do you think that?" "Because when I do, he gets this look." Eli's face scrunched up, trying to describe something he didn't have words for. "Like it hurts him. So I stopped." "Maybe," Lena said carefully, "it hurts because it's beautiful. Because it reminds him of something good he lost. That doesn't mean you should stop doing beautiful things." Eli thought about this for a long moment. "Would you like it? If I sang?" "I would like it very much." So Eli sang, a little song about a mockingbird, his voice high and sweet and heartbreakingly pure. Lena kept kneading, her throat tight, and when he finished, she told him it was the loveliest thing she'd heard in a long time. That evening, when Cole came in for supper, Eli sang the same song at the table. Cole's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and for a moment Lena thought he might tell the boy to stop. But instead, his eyes filled and he smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "That was beautiful, son," he said quietly. "Your mama would have loved hearing it." Eli beamed, and something in the house shifted, not fixed, not healed, but a little less broken than before. On the fourth morning, Lena woke to find Cole already in the kitchen, coffee made, looking uncomfortable. "I need to go into town," he said without preamble. "Check on some things, pick up supplies. I was thinking you and Eli could come with me. You'll need to let Mabel know what we're short on, and—" He hesitated. "Might be good for people to see you're settling in all right. Less gossip that way." "All right." Lena poured herself coffee. "How long will we be gone?" "Most of the day, probably. Town's not big, but there's business to handle." Cole shifted his weight. "And I thought maybe you'd want to stop by the post office, in case you're expecting letters or want to send any." The implication was clear. He was offering her the chance to contact people back east, to let anyone who might be worried know where she was. It was considerate, and it made Lena realize she had no one to write to. No family wondering where she'd ended up, no friends who'd notice her absence. "That's kind of you," she said, "but I don't have anyone expecting to hear from me." Something flickered across Cole's face. Not pity exactly, more like recognition. "Neither did Sarah when she first came out here. No family to speak of. That's part of why we understood each other." It was the first time he'd volunteered information about his late wife. Lena wanted to ask more, but didn't want to push. Instead, she just nodded. "I'll get Eli ready." The ride into Ridgehaven was easier than the first trip. Eli chattered the whole way, pointing out landmarks, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, a place where the road forded a shallow creek, the spot where he'd once seen an eagle. Cole drove in comfortable silence, occasionally adding details to Eli's enthusiastic narration. The town looked slightly less desperate in the morning light. People moved along the main street with purpose, going about their business. A few heads turned when Cole's wagon rolled past, and Lena could feel the weight of curious stares. Cole pulled up in front of Mabel's store and helped Lena down. "I've got to see the bank and the feed supplier. Should take about an hour. You all right managing on your own?" "I'll be fine." Lena took Eli's hand. "We'll be inside with Mabel." The bell chimed when they entered, and Mabel looked up from her ledger. Her eyebrows rose when she saw Lena. "Well, you're still here." "Still here," Lena managed to smile. "Cole sent me to give you a supply list and settle the account." "Did he now?" Mabel came around the counter, studying Lena with those sharp eyes. "How's it going out there? He treating you fairly?" "Very fairly. He's been nothing but respectful." Lena pulled the list from her pocket. "We need flour, sugar, salt, some dried fruit if you have it, coffee. And if you have any fabric scraps, I'd like to patch some of Eli's clothes." Mabel took the list, read it over. "This is a solid list, organized. You've been taking inventory." "The pantry needed it." "I bet it did." Mabel started pulling items from shelves. "Cole's a good man, but he's been barely keeping his head above water. Sarah's death hit him hard. Eli, too." "I've noticed." Lena watched Eli, who'd wandered over to look at a display of penny candy. "He's a sweet boy." "He is, and he's had a rough time of it." Mabel set a sack of flour on the counter with a thump. "Whole town's been worried about those two. Glad someone's finally out there helping. I'm just the housekeeper." "Uh-huh." Mabel's tone made it clear she didn't quite believe that, or at least thought it wasn't the whole story. "How long you planning to stay?" "As long as the arrangement works." Lena met her eyes steadily. "I'm saving for train fare. Once I have enough to start over somewhere, I'll give Cole notice and move on." "And where somewhere?" "I don't know yet." Mabel studied her for a long moment, then nodded like she'd made some decision. "Well, while you're figuring it out, you should know. Town's got a sewing circle. Meets Thursday afternoons at the church. You'd be welcome if you wanted to come." It was an olive branch, an offer of connection. Lena wasn't sure she wanted to take it. Getting involved with the town meant getting involved with their questions, their assumptions, their gossip. But it also meant not being completely isolated out at the ranch. "I'll think about it, thank you." "Good enough." Mabel finished gathering the supplies. "This comes to $7.40. I'll put it on Cole's account." The door opened and two women entered, both middle-aged and well-dressed by frontier standards. They stopped short when they saw Lena, and she watched recognition dawn on their faces. The younger of the two, maybe 40, with graying blonde hair, spoke first. "You're the bride Silas Creed abandoned." There was no good way to respond to that. Lena just nodded. "I'm Margaret Patterson. This is Alice Winters." The woman's voice softened. "We heard what happened. It's disgraceful, the way that man operates." He should be horsewhipped, Alice added sharply. She was older, steel-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that suggested she was used to being listened to. The territorial marshal is useless, claims there's no law against broken promises. There isn't, Mabel said. Not one they're willing to enforce, anyway. Margaret turned back to Lena. Are you staying, or did he run you off too? I'm working for Cole Hart, Lena said carefully. Housekeeping. It's a temporary arrangement. Temporary. Alice made a thoughtful sound. Well, if you need anything while you're here, references, connections, help finding more permanent work, you come see me. I run the boarding house on 3rd Street. Always need reliable help. It was kindness, unexpected and straightforward. Lena felt something tight in her chest ease slightly. Thank you. I'll remember that. The women nodded and moved deeper into the store, but Lena could feel their continued interest, their protective concern. It was strange being worried over by strangers, but it was also better than the cold indifference she'd expected. Cole appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, looking tired but satisfied. All set? All set. Lena gestured to the supplies Mabel had wrapped. Everything's on your account. Good. Cole started loading things into the wagon. We should head back. Storm's coming in later. The ride home was quieter. Eli had worn himself out and dozed against Lena's side, his weight warm and trusting. The sky to the west was darkening, clouds building up over the mountains in great purple-gray towers. Rain'll be good for the land, Cole said, watching the approaching storm. We've been dry too long. Is the house sound? No leaks? Not that I know of, but then I haven't exactly been paying close attention. He glanced at her. You settling in all right? Really? Really? Lena adjusted Eli's weight against her. It's honest work, that's all I wanted. You got more than you bargained for, though, with Eli. Cole's jaw tightened. He's getting attached. I can see it. I've been trying to remind him you're not staying, but he's 7, and he's grieving, and he wants someone to fill the hole his mother left, Lena finished. I know. I'm not trying to take her place, Cole, but I'm also not going to be cold to a child who's hurting. There has to be a middle ground. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Sarah would have liked you, he said finally. She was practical like that, kind but not soft, knew how to help without making people feel helpless. It was the highest compliment he could have paid, and they both knew it. Lena didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. They reached the ranch just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Cole got the horses unhitched and into the barn, while Lena carried the supplies inside, Eli trailing after her. By the time Cole came back in, the rain was hammering down in earnest, drumming on the roof and turning the yard to mud. He stood in the doorway dripping, and Lena handed him a towel without comment. Thank you. He dried his face, his hands. I'll get a fire going. Nights get cold when it rains. I'll make supper. Lena was already moving toward the kitchen. Eli, you want to help me? Yes, ma'am. They worked together in comfortable rhythm, Eli fetching things, Lena cooking, Cole building up the fire in the main room until warmth pushed back the damp chill. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, the house felt solid, protected. After supper, Eli begged for a story, and Cole surprised Lena by pulling out a worn book and reading aloud in a steady voice while the boy curled up between them on the settee. It was deeply domestic, almost painfully so, and Lena kept having to remind herself this wasn't her family. This wasn't her life. This was just a job. But when Eli's head drooped onto her shoulder and his breathing evened out into sleep, when Cole looked up and met her eyes over the boy's head with an expression of exhausted gratitude, it didn't feel temporary. It felt like something dangerous, something that could hurt when it ended. Lena excused herself and retreated to her room, listening to the rain and trying not to think about how easy it would be to let herself believe this could be permanent, how easy it would be to let herself care. She'd been fooled once by a man's promises. She wouldn't let it happen again, not even when the promise was unspoken and the danger was hope itself. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Lena rose with the sun, got the stove going, made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Cole would come in from the early barn work smelling of hay and leather, his hands clean but his boots dusty, and they'd share breakfast in companionable silence while Eli slowly surfaced from sleep. The boy had started sleeping through the night. No more nightmares, no more wandering the house looking for his mother. Lena told herself it had nothing to do with her, that it was just time doing its work. but she couldn't quite believe it. The house had transformed under her care. Floors gleamed, windows sparkled, the kitchen smelled like bread and coffee, and whatever she had simmering on the stove. She'd mended curtains, patched Eli's clothes, even started tackling the vegetable garden for next spring, turning soil that had gone hard over the summer. Cole paid her every Saturday morning, counting out $5 with the careful precision of a man who knew exactly what money meant. She tucked each payment into a small tin box she kept under her bed, watching her escape fund grow. $30 now. Enough for train fare if she needed to leave suddenly, but not enough to start over somewhere with any real security. She told herself she was staying because she needed more. Told herself it had nothing to do with the way Eli's face lit up when she came into a room, or the way Cole had started lingering over coffee in the mornings, talking about the ranch, about his plans, about nothing in particular except that he seemed to want her there to listen. It was dangerous, this settling in, this forgetting that it was temporary. The reminder came on a Tuesday afternoon when she least expected it. Lena was in the garden, pulling weeds that had sprung up after the last rain, when she heard hoofbeats. Not the slow, steady rhythm of a working horse, but something faster, urgent. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a rider approaching at a gallop. Cole emerged from his barn at the same moment, his hand going reflexively to his hip where a gun would have been if he'd been wearing one. The rider pulled up in a spray of dust. A young man, maybe 20, with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest and panic written all over his face. "Mr. Hart, is Miss Marlowe here?" Lena's stomach went cold. She walked toward them, dirt still on her hands, already knowing this wasn't going to be good news. "I'm Lena Marlowe." The deputy's eyes found her, and his expression shifted into something that looked like pity mixed with urgency. "Ma'am, you need to come into town, right now. Silas Creed's back." The world tilted sideways. Lena heard the words but couldn't quite make them connect to reality. "That's not possible. He left. He's been gone for—" 3 weeks and 4 days, the deputy interrupted. "Sheriff's been tracking him. We got word yesterday he was headed back this direction, and this morning he rode into town like he owned the place. He's at the saloon right now, telling anyone who'll listen that you're his legal wife and you ran off with stolen property." "That's a lie." Cole's voice was flat, dangerous. "She never married him, never even met him before she got off that train." "I know that, sir. Sheriff knows it too. But Creed's got papers, a marriage certificate, a receipt for money he claims she took, witnesses who'll swear—" The deputy shook his head. "It's all fabricated, but it's official-looking enough to cause trouble. Sheriff wants Miss Marlowe to come in and make a statement before this gets out of hand." "What kind of trouble?" Lena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "The kind where a man can claim his wife is being held against her will and get the law on his side." The deputy's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I know it's not right. But you need to come tell your side before Silas poisons the whole town against you." Cole was already moving toward the barn. "I'll hitch the wagon." "No time for that." The deputy gestured to his horse. "I can take Miss Marlowe. You follow when you can." "I'm not sending her into town alone to face that bastard." Cole's tone left no room for argument. "Then saddle up fast." The deputy looked at Lena. "Ma'am, I need you to understand. Silas is saying some ugly things. About you. About Mr. Hart here. About the arrangement you've got. You're going to walk into a room full of people who've heard his version first. You need to be ready for that." Lena nodded, her mind racing. She'd known Silas was a con man, a thief, but she'd thought he was a coward too. Thought he'd stay gone rather than risk facing the consequences. She'd been wrong. "Give me 2 minutes." She hurried into the house, scrubbed her hands clean, changed into her better dress, the one that made her look respectable instead of like a woman who'd spent the morning in a garden. When she came back out, Cole had 2 horses saddled, and Eli was standing in the barn doorway, his small face tight with worry. "Papa? Where are you going?" "Into town, son. Miss Lena needs some help with something." Cole crouched down, his hands on Eli's shoulders. "I need you to stay here. Can you do that? Stay in the house? Keep the door locked? Don't go wandering." "Is it bad, men?" Eli's voice was very small. "It's just one man who's saying things that aren't true, and we're going to go fix it." Cole pulled his son into a quick, hard embrace. "I'll be back before dark. I promise." Eli nodded against his father's chest, then pulled back and looked at Lena. "Are you coming back too?" The question hit her right in the sternum. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm coming back. Promise? I promise. It felt like tempting fate, making a promise she might not be able to keep, but the relief on Eli's face made it worth the risk. They rode hard, the deputy setting a pace just shy of reckless. Lena wasn't an experienced rider. She'd been on a horse maybe 3 times in her life, but she clung to the saddle and let the animal follow Cole's mount. The landscape blurred past, sage and grass and distant mountains, everything sharp-edged in the afternoon light. Her mind kept circling back to one question. Why had Silas come back? He'd gotten away clean, had her money, had probably already spent it. There was no logical reason to risk exposure unless he thought he could gain something more, unless he thought he could turn his con into something even more profitable. They reached Ridgehaven in half the time it usually took, and Lena could see immediately that something had changed. People stood in clusters on the street, talking in low voices, their eyes tracking toward the saloon. When Lena dismounted, less gracefully than she would have liked, her legs shaking from the ride, those eyes swung to her. Some held sympathy, others held judgment. The deputy led them straight to the sheriff's office, a squat building at the end of the main street. Inside, Sheriff Garrett, a weathered man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a salt and pepper beard, stood from behind his desk. Miss Marlowe, Mr. Hart, he gestured to chairs. Appreciate you coming in quick. What exactly is Silas claiming? Cole asked, not sitting. That he and Miss Marlowe were legally married by proxy 2 months ago, that she came to Ridgehaven as his wife, took one look at the ranch he'd prepared for her, decided it wasn't good enough, and ran off with money he'd given her for household expenses. Garrett's expression made it clear what he thought of this story. He's got papers that look official enough to fool people who don't look too close. It's completely false. Lena forced herself to sit, to look calm, even though her heart was hammering. I never married him. We corresponded through a matrimonial service, yes, but there was no marriage. I came to Ridgehaven expecting to meet him for the first time. He wasn't there. That's the truth. I believe you, ma'am. So does pretty much everyone who's dealt with Silas before. Garrett sat back down, steepled his fingers. Problem is, he's learned from his mistakes. The other women he conned, they left town quick. Didn't stick around to fight. You did. And now he's decided that makes you a threat worth neutralizing. By claiming she's his wife? Cole's hands were clenched into fists. That doesn't neutralize anything. That just gives her more reason to see him prosecuted. Unless he can make it look like she's a liar and a thief. Garrett pulled out a document from his desk drawer. This is the marriage certificate he's showing around. It's got the right seals, the right signatures. I sent a wire to the county clerk's office where it was supposedly filed. Waiting to hear back, but I'd bet money it's a forgery. Lena leaned forward to look at the document. It was elaborate, official-looking, with her name spelled out in careful script next to Silas Creed's. The date was 2 months ago, just after she'd sent him the $70. This is the first time I've seen this, she said quietly. I never signed anything. Never agreed to any marriage. This is a complete fabrication. Figured as much. Garrett tucked the paper back into his drawer. But here's the problem, Miss Marlowe. Until I get confirmation it's a forgery, Silas can use it to make your life very difficult. He can claim you owe him money, can claim you're living in sin with Mr. Hart here, can drag both your reputations through the mud in ways that'll stick even after we prove he's lying. So what do we do? Lena heard the tremor in her voice and hated it. We let him make his play. Garrett's eyes were hard. He's not just back to harass you. He's back because he thinks he can get more money, either from you or from Mr. Hart, or from someone else he's got lined up. Men like Silas, they get greedy. They overreach. We just need to give him enough rope to hang himself. You want to use her as bait? Cole said flatly. I want to catch a predator before he hurts anyone else. Garrett met Cole's stare without flinching. Miss Marlowe's the only victim who's stayed put long enough to testify. If we can document what he's doing, get witnesses who'll speak against him, we might actually be able to put him away. And if it goes wrong, Cole's voice was dangerous. If he decides to escalate instead of backing down, then I'll arrest him for harassment, and we'll hope the charges stick. Garrett looked at Lena. But it's your choice, ma'am. You want to leave town? I can't stop you. You want to hide out at the Hart Ranch until this blows over? That's your right. But if you want to make sure Silas faces justice, you're going to have to be brave enough to stand in front of him and call him a liar to his face. The room was very quiet. Outside, Lena could hear the normal sounds of the town, horses, voices, the creak of wagon wheels, everything ordinary and safe. And somewhere out there, in the saloon or on the street, Silas Creed was weaving his lies and waiting for her to break. She thought about the other women, the ones who'd left, too ashamed or too afraid to fight. Thought about whoever might come after her if Silas was allowed to keep operating. Thought about Eli, back at the ranch, asking if she was coming home. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Garrett's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "First thing, I need you to make an official statement. Everything that happened from the time you first contacted Silas until now. Then we're going to walk across the street to the saloon, and you're going to confront him in front of witnesses." "Absolutely not." Cole stepped forward. "You're not putting her in a room with that man without protection." "I'll be there," Garrett said. "So will my deputy, and you if you want. But Miss Marlowe needs to be the one doing the talking, needs to look him in the eye and not back down." "I can do that." Lena was surprised by how steady her voice came out. "But I want something understood first. If Silas has documents claiming I'm his wife, I want documentation just as official stating I'm not. I want it in writing, signed by you, that I came to this town as Lena Marlowe, single, and that I never at any point entered into any legal arrangement with Silas Creed." "Smart." Garrett pulled out paper and pen. "We'll get that done right now before anything else. And I'll make copies. One for you, one for the county records, one for Mr. Hart here in case he needs to prove you're his employee and nothing more." The implication was clear. Garrett was protecting them all from whatever poison Silas might try to spread. Lena felt a rush of gratitude for this careful, methodical man who was treating her like a person worth defending instead of a problem to be managed. She gave her statement slowly, precisely, leaving nothing out. The matrimonial advertisement, the letters, the money she'd sent, the empty platform. Every detail went into the record, witnessed and signed. By the time they finished, the afternoon light was starting to slant golden through the window. "Ready?" Garrett stood, settling his gun belt more firmly on his hips. Lena's mouth was dry, but she nodded. Cole moved to her side, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the solid presence that said she wasn't going into this alone. They walked across the street in formation, Garrett in front, Lena and Cole behind him, the deputy bringing up the rear. People stopped to watch. Word had clearly spread that something was about to happen. The saloon doors swung open under Garrett's hand, and Lena stepped into a room that went immediately, unnaturally silent. There were maybe 20 people inside, mostly men, a few women of the sort who worked in saloons. And there, at a table near the bar with a whiskey glass in front of him and a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes, sat Silas Creed. He was handsome in a polished, practiced way. Blonde hair slicked back, good clothes that looked too fine for Ridgehaven, hands that had never done a day's hard labor. He looked exactly like what he was, a con man who relied on charm instead of substance. His eyes found Lena and lit with something that made her skin crawl. "Darling," he said, standing with exaggerated courtesy, "I've been so worried. When you disappeared, I thought something terrible had happened." "Don't," Lena's voice cut through the performance. "Don't call me that. Don't pretend. Everyone in this room is about to hear the truth." Silas's smile never wavered. "The truth is, we're married, sweetheart. You might have forgotten in your current situation, but I haven't." His gaze slid to Cole, and his expression shifted into something uglier. "Though I can see why you might prefer a rougher type. Some women do." Cole moved forward, but Garrett's hand on his chest stopped him. "Let her handle it." Lena stepped past both of them, stopping 6 feet from Silas, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to stay out of reach. "My name is Lena Marlowe," she said, pitching her voice to Carrie. "I am not now, nor have I ever been, married to this man. I responded to a matrimonial advertisement. We exchanged letters. He convinced me to send him $70, which I did. When I arrived in Ridgehaven 3 weeks ago, he wasn't there to meet me because he'd left town with my money. That's the truth. Everything else is a lie designed to cover up the fact that Silas Creed is a thief and a fraud." "She's hysterical," Silas said smoothly, addressing the room. "Understandably upset. Our marriage wasn't what she expected, and she—" "Show them the marriage certificate," Lena interrupted. "The one you claim is real. Show everyone the signature you say is mine." Silas hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Lena to know she'd guessed right. He pulled the document from his jacket, unfolded it with a flourish. "My wife's signature, witnessed and legal." Lena took the paper from his hand, held it up so the room could see. Then she pulled a piece of paper from her own pocket, the copy of her statement Garrett had given her, and held it beside the certificate. "This is my signature," she said, pointing to the statement. "This is how I write my name. Look at the certificate. The handwriting doesn't match. It's not even close." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People were looking now, really looking, comparing the two documents. Silas's smile finally cracked. "Signatures change," he said, but his voice had lost some of its smooth confidence. "When a woman's distressed, I was never distressed enough to marry a man I'd never met in person." Lena handed both papers to Garrett. "Sheriff, I want this forgery entered as evidence, and I want everyone here to know. Silas Creed has done this before. At least 3 other women that we know of, maybe more. He finds desperate women, promises them safety, and then steals everything they have." "That's slander," Silas snapped. "I could sue you for what? Telling the truth?" Mabel's voice came from the doorway. Lena turned to see the shopkeeper standing there with Margaret Patterson and Alice Winters flanking her. "Mika, because I've got ledgers showing all the supplies you bought on credit and never paid for. And Margaret here has letters from 2 of the women you swindled. And Alice has been in contact with the Territorial Marshal's office about your activities." Silas's face was going red. "This is ridiculous. I'm a businessman. I have rights." "You're a criminal," Garrett said flatly. "And you just made a mistake coming back here. Deputy, take Mr. Creed into custody." "On what charge?" Silas was backing toward the bar now, his charm completely stripped away. "You can't arrest me for fraud, theft, forgery." Garrett ticked them off. "And that's just for starters. We'll see what else we can add once we start going through your previous crimes." The deputy moved forward with handcuffs, but Silas wasn't done. He lunged sideways, grabbed Lena's wrist, and yanked her toward him hard enough to make her stumble. "You're not taking me anywhere," he snarled. "She's my wife. That makes her my property, and I'm leaving with—" Lena didn't think. She just reacted. Her free hand came up and cracked across Silas's face with every ounce of strength she had. The slap echoed through the saloon like a gunshot. Silas's grip loosened in shock, and Cole was there in an instant, pulling Lena back and putting himself between her and Silas. The deputy got the handcuffs on before Silas could recover, and suddenly it was over. The threat was contained, locked in iron, being hauled toward the door. "This isn't finished," Silas was shouting now, all pretense gone. "I'll fight this. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you are, living in sin with a widower, pretending to be respectable." "Get him out of here," Garrett ordered, and the deputy complied, manhandling Silas through the door and out into the street. The silence that followed was absolute. Lena stood in the center of it, her hand stinging, her heart pounding, and every eye in the room on her. She waited for judgment, for condemnation, for someone to say that Silas was right about her. Instead, Mabel started clapping. It was slow at first, deliberate, but then Margaret joined in, and Alice. And then men at the bar were standing and applauding, and the whole saloon erupted in approval. Lena stared at them, stunned. "About time someone stood up to that bastard," a cowboy near the window called out. "Damn fine speech," another added. Garrett put a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Miss Marlowe, real good. Now let's get you somewhere quiet before you collapse." Lena nodded mutely, let him guide her back outside. Cole was right beside her, his hand at her elbow, steady and sure. The street was crowded now. Word had spread fast, and people were gathering to see Silas being locked in the small jail behind the sheriff's office. "Lena." Cole's voice was low, meant only for her. "You all right?" "I hit him." Lena looked at her hand, still red from the impact. "I've never hit anyone in my life." "He had it coming." Cole's tone was grim satisfaction. "Though I would have preferred to do it myself." "You and half the territory," Garrett said dryly. "Come on, let's get statements from the ladies and figure out what else we need to make this stick." The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and testimony. Mabel produced her ledgers. Margaret shared letters from 2 of Silas's previous victims, women who'd written to her asking if anyone in Ridgehaven could confirm their suspicions about the man who'd conned them. Alice had a thick folder of correspondence with the Territorial Marshal, documenting every time she'd tried to get someone to investigate Silas's activities. "This is enough," Garrett said finally, looking at the pile of evidence. "More than enough. He's not walking away from this." "What happens now?" Lena asked. "Now he sits in jail until the territorial judge makes his circuit through here. That'll be about 2 weeks." Garrett leaned back in his chair. Trial will be public. You'll need to testify. So will the others, if they're willing to come. I'll write to them tonight, Margaret said firmly. They deserve the chance to see him face justice. What about the marriage certificate? Lena's voice was tight. Even if it's fake, could it cause problems? Already wired the county clerk. Should hear back tomorrow confirming it's a forgery. Garrett looked at her seriously. But even if they say it's legitimate, which they won't, you can contest it. You never consented. That makes it void. Thank you. Lena felt the tension finally starting to ease. All of you. I don't know what I would have done if... You would have figured it out, Mabel interrupted. You're tougher than you think, girl. Tougher than Silas counted on, anyway. The sun was setting by the time they finally left the sheriff's office. Cole had been silent through most of the proceedings, but now he touched Lena's arm gently. We should get back. Eli's probably worried sick. Lena nodded, suddenly exhausted. The ride back to the ranch was slow, the horses tired, the darkness gathering around them. Cole stayed close, watchful, and Lena was grateful for his presence. You were right, she said quietly. When you said I got more than I bargained for, you were right. So were you, Cole replied, about finding a middle ground, about helping without making people helpless. He was quiet for a moment. Sarah would have stood up to him the same way, wouldn't have backed down, wouldn't have let him make her smaller. It was the highest praise Lena had ever received. She didn't trust herself to respond, so she just nodded and kept riding. The ranch appeared like a beacon in the darkness, lamplight glowing in the windows. The door flew open before they reached it, and Eli came running out, heedless of Cole's earlier instructions to stay inside. You came back, both of you. He grabbed Lena's hand as she dismounted, holding tight. I was scared you wouldn't. I promised, didn't I? Lena crouched down to his level. And I keep my promises. Eli threw his arms around her neck, and Lena held him, feeling the fear drain out of his small body. Over his head, she met Cole's eyes. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition that what they had here was more complicated than employer and employee, more fragile than family, but heading that direction despite their best intentions. Come on, Cole said finally. Let's get inside. It's been a long day. They went in together, Eli between them, and Lena tried not to think about how much it felt like coming home. That night, sleep came in fragments. Lena lay in her narrow bed listening to the house settle around her, her mind replaying the confrontation in the saloon over and over, the weight of Silas's hand on her wrist, the shock in his eyes when she'd slapped him, the sound of applause that had followed, unexpected and affirming and somehow more unsettling than condemnation would have been. She'd stood up to him. She'd won. So why did she feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop? The answer came 3 days later, at dawn, when hoofbeats thundered into the yard and someone started pounding on the door hard enough to rattle it on its hinges. Cole was up and moving before Lena had even processed the sound. She heard his bedroom door open, heard his footsteps cross the main room, heard the scrape of the bolt being drawn back. By the time she'd thrown on her wrapper and emerged from her room, Cole stood in the doorway talking to a man on horseback. Not the deputy this time, but someone older, harder looking. What's going on? Lena's voice came out rougher than she intended. Cole turned, his face grim in the early light. Silas escaped. Sometime during the night, they found the deputy unconscious and the cell door standing open. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. How? Someone helped him. The rider dismounted and Lena recognized him now, Tom Brennan, one of the ranch hands who sometimes worked the neighboring spreads. Sheriff found tracks from at least 2 horses. Silas had help waiting, and they hit the deputy from behind when he brought breakfast. Is the deputy all right? Cole asked. Concussed but alive, mad as hell. Tom's expression was apologetic. Sheriff sent me to warn you. He figures Silas might come here, might try to finish what he started at the saloon. Lena's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, forcing herself to think clearly. Why would he come here? He's free. He should run. Because you humiliated him in front of half the town. Cole's voice was flat, stating facts. Because you've got evidence against him, and he knows as long as you're willing to testify, he's not safe anywhere in the territory. So he's going to try to silence me. Lena said it calmly, though her heart was hammering. Or scare you into leaving, Tom added. Either way, Sheriff wants you protected. He's organizing men to search, but that could take days. In the meantime, she stays here where I can keep her safe." Cole's tone left no room for argument. "Tom, tell Garrett we're locked down. Anyone comes near this ranch who isn't expected, I'm shooting first and asking questions later." Tom nodded, already swinging back into his saddle. "I'll pass it along. You got enough ammunition?" "Enough." Cole waited until Tom had ridden off before turning to Lena. His face was carefully controlled, but she could see the fear underneath. "Get Eli. We need to make some preparations." The next hour passed in tense activity. Cole brought out weapons Lena hadn't known he owned: a rifle, a shotgun, a pistol he strapped to his hip with practiced ease. He showed her how to load the shotgun, how to aim it, how to fire if she had to. "I don't want you using this unless there's no other choice," he said, his hand steadying hers on the stock. "But if it comes to that, you aim for center mass and you don't hesitate. Understand?" "I understand." Lena's voice was steadier than her hands. Eli watched all of this from the doorway, his small face pale. "Papa, are bad men coming?" Cole crouched down, pulling his son close. "Maybe. I don't know. But that's why we're getting ready. So we can keep Miss Lena safe, and keep you safe, and make sure nobody hurts our family." "Our family." The words hung in the air, accidental and profound. Cole seemed to realize what he'd said, and his eyes found Lena's over Eli's head. She saw the question there, the fear that he'd overstepped. She just nodded. Right now, in this moment, that's exactly what they were. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Cole kept watch from the windows, the rifle within easy reach. Lena tried to maintain some sense of normalcy for Eli's sake, making meals, reading stories, acting like everything was fine even though her stomach was twisted in knots. Every sound made her jump, every shadow seemed threatening. Eli picked up on the tension despite their efforts. He stayed close to Lena, following her from room to room, his hand finding hers whenever she stood still long enough. At one point, he looked up at her with those two old eyes and asked, "Are you scared?" Lena considered lying, then decided he deserved the truth. "Yes, I am." "Me too." His hand tightened on hers. "But Papa's here. He won't let anything bad happen." The faith in his voice was absolute, and it made Lena's chest ache. She hoped desperately that faith wouldn't be misplaced. Night fell with no sign of Silas, but the tension only increased. Cole barricaded the door with the heavy oak table, checked all the windows, made sure the lamps were positioned to cast light without creating silhouettes. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done this before, and Lena wondered what his life had been like before Sarah, before the ranch, before he'd become the steady, careful man she'd come to know. "You should try to sleep," Cole said around midnight. "I'll keep watch." "I won't be able to." Lena sat at the table he'd moved, the shotgun within reach. "You should rest. I can watch for a few hours." "Lena, I mean it. You've been up since before dawn. You're exhausted." She met his eyes. "Let me do this. Please." Cole hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Wake me if anything, and I mean anything, seems wrong. A sound, a feeling, anything." "I will." He retreated to check on Eli, and Lena was left alone in the lamplight, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Wind in the eaves, the distant call of coyotes, the creak and pop of wood settling. Every sound felt loaded with threat, but nothing materialized. The hours stretched on, and Lena fought to stay alert, to keep her eyes from drifting closed. She was pouring herself another cup of coffee when she heard it. Hoofbeats, multiple riders, approaching fast from the east. Her hand went to the shotgun even as she called out, "Cole!" He was there in seconds, rifle in hand, moving to the window. "How many?" "I can't tell. 3, maybe 4. Lena's mouth was dry. "Could be the sheriff's men." "Could be." Cole didn't sound convinced. He moved to the door, positioned himself where he could see out through a gap in the boards. "Stay back. Keep Eli in the bedroom." But Eli was already awake, standing in his doorway with his arms wrapped around himself. Lena went to him, guided him back into his room, sat him on the bed. "Stay here, sweetheart. Stay quiet. Can you do that for me?" Eli nodded, his eyes huge in the darkness. Lena went back to the main room just as someone hammered on the door. "Hart, open up!" It wasn't Silas's voice. Cole recognized it too. His shoulders dropped slightly from their rigid line. "That's Garrett." He pulled the table away from the door, drew back the bolt. Sheriff Garrett stood on the porch with 3 deputized men behind him, all armed, all looking grim. "We got him," Garrett said without preamble. "Caught him trying to buy a horse at the Brennan place. He's back in custody, and this time he's got chains on and 2 guards watching him round the clock." The relief hit Lena so hard she had to sit down. Cole closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were bright with something that might have been tears. "Anyone hurt?" he asked. "Silas put up a fight, broke Tom Brennan's nose before we got him subdued." Garrett's expression was satisfied. "That's assault on top of everything else now, and we found his accomplice. Fellow named Jack Morris, used to run card games at the saloon. He's locked up too." "So it's over." Lena heard herself say it, still not quite believing. "Not over until he's convicted and sentenced," Garrett corrected. "But he's not getting away again, I guarantee that." He looked at Cole. "You folks all right here?" "We're fine." Cole's hand found Lena's shoulder, squeezed gently. "Thanks for the warning earlier and for catching him." "Just doing my job." Garrett tipped his hat to Lena. "Ma'am, the trial's set for 2 weeks from tomorrow. Territorial judge is making a special trip. You'll need to testify." "I'll be there." Lena's voice was steady now. "Whatever it takes." After Garrett and his men left, the house felt different. Lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted that Lena hadn't fully realized was pressing down on them. Cole moved the table back to its proper place, put the weapons away, and stood in the center of the room, looking lost. "I should check the barn," he said finally. "Make sure everything's secure." "At 2 a.m? I need to move, He shook his head, frustrated with himself. "I thought I was going to have to defend this house tonight. Defend you. And I was ready to do it, but the thought of Eli being here, of him seeing—" "But he didn't have to see," Lena interrupted gently. "And you didn't have to defend anything. It worked out." "This time." Cole's jaw was tight. "What about next time? What about the next man who decides you're an easy target because you're alone and you don't have anyone to—" He stopped, realizing what he was saying. Lena stood, moved closer to him. "I'm not alone. Not anymore. I have this job. I have people in town who stood up for me. I have you and Eli—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I have more than I've had in years. That's not nothing." "It's not enough." The words came out raw, unguarded. "You deserve more than temporary. More than a job that'll end as soon as you save enough money to leave. You deserve—" He didn't finish. Couldn't, maybe. But Lena understood what he wasn't saying, understood it in the way he was looking at her, in the careful distance he kept despite clearly wanting to close it. "Cole," she said softly. "Don't." "Why not?" There was something desperate in his voice now. "Because I'm your employer? Because it's too soon after Sarah? Because you're planning to leave anyway? Because I don't know what I deserve." Lena's throat was tight. 6 weeks ago, I thought I deserved Silas's promises. Look how that turned out. I'm not Silas. I know you're not. But I'm also not the woman you lost, and Eli's not my son. And this arrangement we have, it works because we all know the boundaries. If we start blurring those lines, they're already blurred. Cole took a step closer. You know they are. Eli calls for you in his sleep. I find myself planning months ahead with you in the picture. We stopped being employer and employee weeks ago, and you know it." Lena did know it, had been trying not to acknowledge it, trying to keep everything neatly compartmentalized. But standing here in the lamplight with Cole, looking at her like she was something precious and breakable, she couldn't pretend anymore. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "I want you to stay. Not as the housekeeper. Not as a temporary arrangement." Cole's voice dropped. "As someone who belongs here. As family." The word hung between them, weighted with possibility and terror. Lena wanted to say yes, wanted it so badly it scared her. But she'd learned not to trust wanting, learned that desire could lead to disaster. "I need to think," she said finally. "This is too much, too fast. With everything that just happened—" "I know." Cole stepped back, giving her space. "I know. I'm sorry. Bad timing." "Not bad, just—" Lena searched for the right words. "Let's get through the trial first. Let's make sure Silas faces justice, and then we can talk about what comes after." It was a delay, not a refusal. Cole seemed to understand that. He nodded, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. After the trial, then. After the trial. The 2 weeks that followed had a strange, suspended quality, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the other shoe to finally, definitively, drop. The town buzzed with anticipation. Margaret's letters had brought responses from 2 of Silas's previous victims, both women agreeing to make the journey to Ridgehaven to testify. Alice coordinated their arrivals, found them places to stay, and organized what she called the Cavalry, a group of influential women determined to see justice done. Lena met the other women the day before the trial. Catherine Mills had come from Denver, a widow in her 50s who'd lost $200 to Silas's schemes. Ruth Anderson was younger, maybe 30, traveling from Kansas with her brother for protection. Both women carried the same weight Lena recognized in herself: shame mixed with anger, humiliation hardening into determination. "He told me I was special," Catherine said over tea in Alice's boarding house parlor. Said his previous arrangements hadn't worked out because the women didn't understand frontier life. Made me feel like I was different, better. And I believed him. "Same here," Ruth said quietly. "I'd been alone since my husband died. Thought maybe this was my second chance. Instead, it was just another way to lose what little I had left." "That's what he does," Lena said. "He finds the vulnerabilities and exploits them. Makes us feel like the failure was ours when really, he was playing us from the start." "Well, tomorrow he finds out what happens when his victims fight back," Alice said firmly. "You 3 are going to walk into that courthouse and tell the truth, and Silas Creed is going to spend the next few years behind bars thinking about what he's done." "If the judge believes us," Catherine's voice held doubt, "he will." Mabel had joined them, bringing fresh coffee. "We've got documentation. We've got witnesses. We've got Sheriff Garrett, who's made this his personal mission. And we've got you 3, ready to stand up and speak. That's more than enough." Lena wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that the system would work, that justice would be served, that doing the right thing would lead to the right outcome. But she'd learned to be cautious about faith. The trial began at 9 the next morning in the town's small courthouse, really just a large room in the territorial building with a judge's bench at one end and rows of benches for spectators. The room was packed. Lena sat in the front row with Catherine and Ruth, Cole behind them with Eli, who'd insisted on coming despite Cole's reservations. "I want to see the bad man get punished," Eli had said with such fierce determination that neither adult had the heart to refuse him. Silas was brought in wearing chains, his expensive clothes rumpled now, his face drawn. But when his eyes swept the room and landed on Lena, she saw no remorse there, only calculation. He was still looking for an angle, still trying to figure out how to talk his way out. The judge, a weathered man named Thornton with a reputation for no-nonsense jurisprudence, called the court to order. The prosecutor, a young lawyer named Harrison, who'd traveled from the territorial capital, laid out the charges with methodical precision. The territory will show that Silas Creed engaged in a pattern of fraud spanning at least 2 years. That he deliberately targeted vulnerable women through matrimonial services, extracted money from them through false promises, and then abandoned them without recourse. That he forged legal documents, made false statements, and when confronted with his crimes, attempted to intimidate and silence his victims through violence and threats. Silas's lawyer, an older man with a practiced smoothness that set Lena's teeth on edge, stood to present the defense. "My client is a businessman who made legitimate attempts to establish a household through legal matrimonial arrangements. If those arrangements failed to meet expectations on both sides, that's unfortunate but not criminal. The prosecution will attempt to paint Mr. Creed as a villain, but what they're really describing is a series of romantic misunderstandings blown out of proportion by disappointed women." The words hit like slaps. Disappointed women. As if their trauma was just wounded pride. As if Silas hadn't deliberately destroyed their lives for profit. Lena felt Cole's hand on her shoulder, steadying, grounding. She took a breath and kept her expression neutral. Let them underestimate her. Let them think she'd break under questioning. She'd survived Silas once. She could survive this. The prosecution called Sheriff Garrett first. He testified about the previous complaints, about the pattern he'd documented, about finding Lena stranded at the depot and Silas long gone. The defense tried to shake him on cross-examination, suggesting he had personal bias, but Garrett held firm. "I've been sheriff for 12 years, he said flatly. "I know the difference between romantic disappointment and criminal fraud. This is fraud." Catherine testified next, her voice shaking but determined. She described how Silas had courted her through letters, convinced her to sell property and bring the proceeds west, then disappeared 3 days after she arrived with all her money. He said the ranch needed supplies, she said. Said he'd be right back. I waited 2 weeks before I admitted he wasn't coming. By then, I had nothing left. Not even enough for train fare home. The defense attorney was brutal in cross-examination. Isn't it true you gave Mr. Creed that money willingly, that there was no theft, no force? He lied to get it. But you gave it to him voluntarily, based on promises he made, promises that perhaps he genuinely intended to keep at the time. No, Catherine's voice hardened. He never intended to keep them. It was a con from the beginning. Can you prove that? Can you show evidence of intent? I can show that he did the exact same thing to at least 4 other women. At what point does a pattern become proof? The lawyer had no good answer for that. He moved on, but the damage to his narrative was done. Ruth testified to similar experiences, and then it was Lena's turn. She walked to the witness stand with her head high, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. From the stand, she could see the whole courtroom, the packed benches, the jury, 12 men, mostly ranchers and businessmen, watching her with varying degrees of skepticism and sympathy. Cole, his eyes locked on hers, steady as stone. And Silas, leaning back in his chair with an expression that said he thought this was all beneath him. The prosecutor took her through her story methodically. The advertisement, the letters, the money, the empty platform. Her voice stayed level through all of it, even the humiliating parts, even the moments that still made her stomach twist. Then came the defense attorney's turn. He approached with the air of a man about to dismantle a particularly flimsy structure. Miss Marlowe, you claim you came to Ridgehaven to marry my client. Is that correct? I came to meet him in person for the first time. Marriage would have followed if we'd suited each other. But you sent him money before you'd ever met. $70, I believe. Yes. That's quite a sum to give a stranger. His tone was condescending, inviting her to admit foolishness. It is, Lena agreed calmly, which is why I only did it after months of correspondence and only because he'd built trust through consistent, detailed communication. Or perhaps you were simply too eager, too desperate for marriage to think clearly? The prosecutor objected, argumentative, but the judge allowed it. Lena met the lawyer's eyes without flinching. I was cautious, I was methodical, and I was deliberately deceived by a man who's made a career of targeting women in exactly this way. My supposed desperation doesn't change the fact that your client is a practiced con artist. The lawyer's smile tightened. You've been living at Mr. Hart's ranch for weeks now. As his housekeeper, you say? That's correct. Unchaperoned? Just you, Mr. Hart, and his young son? Lena saw where this was going, saw the trap being set. I have my own room. The arrangement is purely professional. Sheriff Garrett has documentation to that effect. But it's unusual, isn't it? A single woman living on a remote ranch with a widower? Some might see that as questionable. Some might see a woman doing honest work to support herself after being victimized. Lena's voice went sharp. But I suppose it's easier to question my morality than to address your client's crimes. The courtroom murmured. The judge gavelled for silence. The lawyer switched tactics. You claim Mr. Creed forged a marriage certificate with your name on it, but isn't it possible you did sign such a document and simply regretted it later? No, the handwriting analysis proves it's not my signature. Handwriting can be inconsistent, especially under stress. Would you like me to write my name for the court? Right now? Lena interrupted. I'll write it 50 times if needed. It won't match that forgery because I never signed it. The lawyer paused, recalculating. You seem very confident for a woman who made such a spectacular error in judgment. I made an error in trusting your client. I'm not making an error in telling the truth about what he did. The questions continued, probing for weakness, for inconsistency, for any crack in her story. But Lena had lived through this, had spent 6 weeks thinking about it, understanding it, preparing for exactly this moment. She didn't break. Finally, the defense rested and Lena was allowed to step down. Her legs were shaking, but she made it back to her seat without stumbling. Cole's hand found hers immediately, squeezed hard. You were perfect, he whispered. The prosecutor called his final witnesses, Mabel with her ledgers, the county clerk who'd confirmed the marriage certificate was fraudulent, the deputy who'd been attacked when Silas escaped. The evidence piled up, piece by piece, building an undeniable picture of systematic, deliberate fraud. The defense called only one witness, Silas himself. He took the stand with wounded dignity, playing the role of maligned gentleman. "I came west to build something," he said earnestly, "to create a home, a family. Yes, some of my arrangements didn't work out. That's the nature of these long-distance courtships. But I never intended to hurt anyone. I never stole. These women gave me money and gifts freely as partners in a venture we were building together." "And when those ventures failed," his lawyer prompted, "I returned what I could and moved on. What else could I do? I'm not a wealthy man. I couldn't compensate everyone for their disappointment." It was smoothly done, almost believable. But then the prosecutor stood for cross-examination and everything changed. "Mr. Creed, you say you returned what you could. Can you provide any evidence of that? Any receipts, any testimony from these women saying you gave them money back?" Silas hesitated. "It was handled privately." "So no evidence. What about the $70 Miss Marlowe gave you? Did you return that?" "I spent it on ranch supplies before I realized the arrangement wouldn't work." "Ranch supplies for a ranch you don't own, that you never owned." The prosecutor pulled out a document. "Property records show no Silas Creed has ever owned land in this territory. So where exactly is this ranch you were preparing?" Silas's smooth facade cracked. "I was in the process of purchasing—" "No, you weren't. We checked with every land office in a 100-mile radius. You never made any inquiries, never put down any deposits, never showed any interest in actually buying property." The prosecutor's voice was cutting now. "Because you never intended to marry any of these women, did you? You intended to rob them. That's not— You forged a marriage certificate with Miss Marlowe's name. Why would you do that if you genuinely wanted to marry her? For legal protection, in case what? In case she reported you? In case she wanted her money back?" The prosecutor leaned in. "You forged that document to have leverage, to be able to claim she was your wife if she tried to press charges. That's not the action of an honest man." Silas was sweating now, his composure unraveling. "You're twisting everything. I'm stating facts. Facts supported by documents, by witnesses, by a pattern of behavior that spans years." The prosecutor turned to the jury. "This man is a predator. He targets vulnerable women, exploits their trust, and discards them when he's taken everything of value. That's not romance gone wrong. That's criminal fraud." The final arguments came quickly after that. The defense tried to salvage what they could, painting Silas as a flawed but well-meaning man caught up in circumstances beyond his control. The prosecution methodically dismantled that narrative, pointing to evidence, to pattern, to the cold calculation behind every one of Silas's choices. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. When they filed back in, Lena's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. The foreman stood, a grizzled rancher named Cooper, who'd sat through the entire trial with a stone-faced expression that gave nothing away. "On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault on a peace officer, we find the defendant guilty. 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 Guilty." The words rang through the courtroom like bells. Silas's face went white, then red, then white again. He started to stand, to protest, but the bailiff's hand on his shoulder forced him back down. Judge Thornton gavelled for order, then looked at Silas with an expression of profound distaste. "Mr. Creed, you have been found guilty of multiple serious crimes. This court sentences you to 5 years hard labor in the territorial prison, followed by permanent banishment from this territory. If you're found here after your release, you'll be arrested on site and the sentence will be extended. Take him away." Silas was shouting as they dragged him out, threats, protests, claims of injustice, but his voice faded as the door closed behind him, and then there was only stunned silence. Then chaos. Good chaos. Catherine was crying. Ruth was hugging her brother. Mabel and Alice and Margaret were embracing like they'd won a war, which in a way they had. The prosecutor was shaking Sheriff Garrett's hand, and Cole was pulling Lena to her feet, his arms coming around her, solid and real and safe. "It's over," he said into her hair. "He can't hurt you anymore. It's finally over." Lena sagged against him, all the tension of the past weeks draining out in a rush. She'd done it. They'd done it. Silas Creed would face consequences. The women he'd hurt had been heard, believed, vindicated. Justice, it turned out, was possible after all. The celebration at Mabel's store that evening had the feeling of a hard-won victory. Catherine and Ruth stayed for 2 more days, and in that time something shifted in all 3 women. The shame they'd carried started to transform into something else. Not pride exactly, but a kind of fierce satisfaction. They'd stood up. They'd spoken truth. They'd won. "I didn't think it was possible," Ruth admitted on her last evening, sitting in Mabel's back room with coffee and the kind of honest conversation that only happened between people who'd survived the same storm. "I thought men like Silas always got away with it, that women like us were just supposed to accept the loss and move on quietly." "That's what he counted on," Catherine said. "The silence, the shame, the idea that we'd be too embarrassed to fight back." She looked at Lena. "You changed that. When you stayed, when you stood up in that saloon, you changed everything." Lena shook her head. "I just did what I had to do. You two did the same thing. You came all this way to testify. That took real courage." "We all had courage," Mabel said firmly, "and we all had each other. That's what made the difference." The word settled into Lena's chest, warm and solid. For so long she'd been alone, even in Saint Louis. Even when she'd been surrounded by people, she'd been fundamentally isolated. No family, no real friends. No one who would have noticed if she'd disappeared. Coming to Ridgehaven had changed that in ways she was only beginning to understand. When Catherine and Ruth finally departed, Catherine back to Denver with enough money donated by the town to start fresh, Ruth to Kansas with her brother, and a promise to write. Lena felt their absence keenly, but she also felt something else, a sense that she'd found her place, her people, her purpose. The question was whether she was brave enough to claim it. She returned to the ranch that afternoon to find Cole working in the barn and Eli playing in the yard with a wooden horse Cole had carved for him. The boy looked up when he heard the wagon and came running, his face split by a wide grin. "Miss Lena, you're back. Papa said you might stay in town longer." "I thought about it," Lena admitted, letting him take her hand, "but I decided I'd rather be here." Something in Eli's expression shifted, relief so profound it made her throat tight. "I'm glad. It's better when you're here. Everything's better." Cole emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, and the look he gave her was complicated. Hope and hesitation tangled together. "How'd it go? Saying goodbye?" "Harder than I expected." Lena let Eli pull her toward the house. "But good, too. They're both going to be all right." "And you?" Cole's voice was quiet. "Are you going to be all right?" It was the question she'd been asking herself for days. The trial was over. Silas was gone. She had nearly $50 saved now, more than enough for train fare, enough for a modest start somewhere else. There was nothing keeping her here except her own choice. That was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. "I think so," she said carefully, "but I need to figure some things out first." Cole nodded, not pushing. "Take your time, there's no rush." But there was a rush, at least in Lena's mind. Every day she stayed made it harder to imagine leaving. Every morning she woke in this house, every meal she shared with Cole and Eli, every quiet evening watching the sun set over the mountains, it all wove itself deeper into her heart, making the thought of departure more painful. She'd told herself this was temporary, had promised herself she wouldn't get attached. But somewhere between scrubbing that first sink full of dishes and standing in a courtroom facing down her past, she'd broken that promise completely. The realization came fully 3 days later, during a completely ordinary moment. She was in the garden. The fall garden she'd planted weeks ago was finally coming in, producing late lettuce and hardy greens. Eli was helping her harvest, chattering about a bird's nest he'd found in the barn, and whether the eggs in it would hatch before winter. The afternoon sun was warm on her shoulders, and the smell of earth and growing things filled the air. Cole came around the corner of the house carrying a repaired fence post, saw them there together, and stopped. The expression on his face was so raw, so full of longing and fear and something that looked a lot like love, that Lena's hand stilled in the dirt. This was home. Not the house, not the garden, not even the ranch itself. These people, this life, this sense of belonging was home. and she'd been so busy protecting herself from disappointment that she'd almost missed it. That evening, after Eli was in bed and Cole was working on accounts at the kitchen table, Lena made coffee and sat down across from him. He looked up, pen paused over the ledger, and something in her expression made him set the pen down completely. "We need to talk," Lena said. Cole's face went carefully neutral. "All right. You asked me to stay. Before the trial, you said you wanted me here as family, not as an employee." Lena wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, needing something to hold on to. "I told you to wait until after the trial." "Well, the trial's over." "It is." Cole's voice was steady, but she could see tension in the way he held himself. "I've been thinking about what you said, about boundaries and how they've blurred." Lena took a breath. "You were right. This stopped being just a job weeks ago. Maybe it never really was just a job. And I've been trying to pretend otherwise because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong person, of believing in something good and having it turn into another version of Silas's con." The words came faster now, spilling out. "I came here expecting nothing and found everything. A home, a purpose, people who actually care whether I stay or go. And that's terrifying because I don't know how to trust it. Don't know how to believe it's real." Cole reached across the table, covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, calloused from work, achingly familiar. "It's real, Lena. I know you have every reason to doubt that, but it's real. What I feel for you is real. What Eli feels, I know what Eli feels." Lena's throat was tight. "He's looking for his mother, and I can't be her. I can't replace Sarah." "I'm not asking you to replace her." Cole's grip tightened. "Sarah was Eli's mother. Nothing changes that. But you're someone who came into his life when he needed it most and showed him that caring about people again doesn't have to lead to more loss. You're someone who made this house feel like a home instead of a tomb. That's not replacement. That's just you." "And what am I to you?" The question came out quieter than she intended. Cole was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You're the woman who walked into my life when I'd given up on everything except surviving day to day. Who looked at my broken family and didn't run. Who stood up to a man who'd hurt you and didn't back down. Who makes me laugh and makes me want to try again. Makes me believe that maybe there's still good things ahead instead of just echoes of what I've lost." Lena's eyes were burning. "Cole, I'm not asking you to marry me tonight," he interrupted. "I know it's too soon for that. You've been here 2 months. We barely know each other. Not really. But I'm asking you to stop thinking of this as temporary. Stop saving money for train fare. Stop planning your exit. Just stay. Give this a real chance. Give us a real chance." It was everything she wanted and everything she'd been afraid to want. Lena looked at him, at this good, steady man who'd offered her safety when she had nothing, who'd stood beside her when she needed an ally, who was looking at her now like she was something precious instead of just convenient. "I don't have anything to offer you," she said quietly. "No money, no property, no... You have yourself. That's enough. That's everything." Cole's thumb moved across her knuckles. "I don't need you to bring anything except your willingness to build something with me. With us." The weight of the decision pressed down on her. This was a crossroads. She could say no, could stick to her original plan, could leave when she had enough money and start over somewhere else. It would be safe, controlled, entirely her own choice. Or she could say yes, could lean into the terrifying vulnerability of trusting someone, of letting herself be part of something bigger than her own survival. Could risk her heart on the possibility that not all promises were lies. "What about Eli?" she asked. "If this doesn't work out between us, if we try and it falls apart, he'll lose someone else. I can't do that to him." "Then we don't let it fall apart." Cole's voice was fierce now. "We work at it. We talk when things get hard. We don't run when it gets complicated. I'm not saying it'll be perfect, Lena. I'm saying it'll be real, and we'll face it together." Lena closed her eyes, felt tears slip down her cheeks, felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart start to crumble. When she opened her eyes again, Cole was watching her with an expression that made it hard to breathe. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." He smiled, small and sad and real. "But I'm more scared of losing you because I was too afraid to ask you to stay." That decided it. Lena turned her hand in his, laced their fingers together. All right, I'll stay. Not as the housekeeper. As my partner, Cole finished. In everything. The ranch, raising Eli, building a life. All of it. All of it, Lena agreed. They sat there in the lamplight, hands joined across the table, and Lena felt something settle in her chest. Not the end of fear, she suspected that would take time, maybe years, but the beginning of faith. The possibility that sometimes broken things could be mended into something even stronger than they were before. Cole stood, moved around the table, and pulled her gently to her feet. For a moment they just stood there, close enough that Lena could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could feel the warmth of him, could hear his heartbeat. "Can I kiss you?" he asked quietly. Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. The kiss was soft, careful, full of promise and patience. It tasted like coffee and hope and the beginning of something that felt like it might actually last. When they pulled apart, Lena was smiling through tears, and Cole's eyes were bright. "I should probably tell Eli," he said, "about us, about you staying." "In the morning," Lena suggested. "Let's just take a moment. Let this be ours first." "In the morning, then." They stayed up late that night talking about everything and nothing. About Sarah, because Cole needed to tell her about the woman he'd loved and lost. About Lena's parents, about growing up poor in St. Louis, about the loneliness that had driven her to answer Silas's advertisement in the first place. They talked about the ranch, about plans for the spring, about whether they should get those pigs back or invest in more cattle instead. They talked like partners, like people building a future together. When Lena finally retreated to her room for now, though that would change soon enough, she lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the house and feeling, for the first time in longer than she could remember, genuinely happy. Eli's reaction the next morning was everything Lena could have hoped for and more. Cole told him over breakfast, with Lena sitting right there, that Miss Lena had agreed to stay permanently, that she wasn't just the housekeeper anymore, but part of their family, that if Eli wanted, they could start planning a real wedding, make everything official. Eli looked from his father to Lena and back again, his eyes going wide. "You mean she's going to be my new mama?" "Not exactly," Cole said, carefully. "Your mama was Sarah. She'll always be your mama. But Lena could be, well, we haven't figured out exactly what to call it yet." "Can I just call you Mama?" Eli asked Lena directly. "I know you're not the same Mama, but you take care of me like a mama, and you make Papa smile again, and I love you like I think you're supposed to love mamas." The question hit Lena right in the heart. She looked at this small boy who'd clung to her on her first day in Ridgehaven, who'd been so desperate for connection that he'd convinced himself a stranger was his lost mother. He wasn't confused anymore. He knew exactly who she was, and he was choosing her anyway. "You can call me whatever feels right to you," Lena said, her voice thick. "Mama, Lena, anything, as long as you know I'm here and I'm staying and I love you too." Eli launched himself out of his chair and into her arms, nearly knocking her sideways. Lena held him tight, this child who wasn't hers by blood, but was becoming hers in every way that mattered, and let herself cry. Happy tears this time. Healing tears. Over Eli's head, she met Cole's eyes and saw them bright with the same emotion. This broken family was putting itself back together in a new configuration, not forgetting what was lost, but making room for what was found. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, in late November when the aspens had gone golden, and the air had that crisp quality that promised snow. They kept it simple, just a ceremony in the small church with the crooked steeple, witnessed by the people who'd become Lena's found family. Mabel and Alice and Margaret sat in the front row, beaming like proud aunts. Sheriff Garrett stood beside Cole as best man, looking uncomfortable in a suit, but genuinely pleased. Eli held the rings, concentrating so hard on not dropping them that his tongue stuck out the corner of his mouth. Lena wore a dress Mabel and the other women had helped her make. Cream-colored wool with blue embroidery at the collar and cuffs, practical enough to wear again, but beautiful enough to make her feel like a bride. Cole wore a new shirt Sarah had started making him years ago, but never finished. Lena had found it in a trunk and completed the work, her stitches mixing with Sarah's in a way that felt like blessing rather than replacement. The minister kept the service short and meaningful. When it came time for vows, Cole took Lena's hands and spoke from his heart, instead of reciting the traditional words. "I promise to be honest with you, even when it's hard. I promise to work beside you, to share the burdens and the joys. I promise to remember that you chose this life, chose us, and to never take that choice for granted. And I promise to love you, not as a replacement for what I lost, but as exactly who you are. Lena's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady when she responded. I promise to build a home with you, not just a house. I promise to help raise Eli with all the love he deserves. I promise to stay, even when things get difficult, and work through problems instead of running from them. And I promise to trust you, to believe in the life we're creating, and to choose hope over fear every day. The ring slid on, simple gold bands that Cole had ordered from a jeweler in the territorial capital. The minister pronounced them married. Cole kissed her gently, thoroughly, while Eli cheered and the small congregation applauded. Lena walked back down the aisle as Mrs. Cole Hart, Eli's hand in hers and Cole's arm around her waist, and felt the last pieces of her broken past finally settle into place. She'd come to Ridgehaven with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams. She was leaving this church with everything that mattered. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, the home that was now officially hers. People brought food and music and genuine joy. There was dancing in the barn, with lanterns strung from the rafters and someone playing fiddle. Lena danced with Cole, with Eli, with Sheriff Garrett, who was surprisingly graceful for such a rough-edged man. At one point, she found herself on the porch catching her breath while inside the party continued. Mabel came out to join her, 2 cups of punch in hand. You did good, Mabel said, handing her a cup. Both of you. This is what healing looks like. I didn't think it was possible, Lena admitted. When I stepped off that train and Silas wasn't there, I thought my life was over. Thought I'd made a mistake I couldn't recover from. Turned out to be the best mistake you ever made. Mabel's smile was knowing. Brought you exactly where you needed to be. You think so? I know so. You were looking for safety with Silas. You found it with Cole, but more than that, you found purpose. Found people worth fighting for. That's rare. Lena looked through the window at Cole, who was lifting Eli onto his shoulders to give the boy a better view of the dancing. Her family. Hers. The word still felt new and fragile and impossibly precious. Thank you, she said quietly, for helping me that first day, for standing up for me when Silas came back, for all of it. That's what we do for each other out here. Mabel clinked her cup against Lena's. Welcome home, Mrs. Hart. Mrs. Hart. The name felt strange and right all at once. Lena had been Lena Marlowe for 26 years, answering to no one, belonging nowhere. Now she was part of something bigger, part of a family, a community, a life she'd helped build instead of one that had been handed to her. The party wound down as the evening grew late and cold. People departed with hugs and congratulations, promising to visit soon. Finally, it was just the 3 of them, Cole and Lena and Eli, standing in the yard watching the last wagon disappear down the road. Can we sleep in the barn? Eli asked suddenly. Like an adventure, all 3 of us? Cole looked at Lena, eyebrows raised. What do you think? Lena thought about the perfectly good house waiting for them, about the bed she'd just started sharing with Cole, about how a sensible person would say no. Then she looked at Eli's hopeful face and thought about how childhood was short and magic was rare, and sometimes adventure mattered more than sense. I think that sounds perfect, she said. They gathered blankets and lanterns and made a nest in the hay. Eli settled between them, chattering about the wedding, about how pretty Lena had looked, about how he'd held the rings without dropping them even once. His voice got slower, softer, until finally it faded into the deep, even breathing of sleep. Lena lay in the darkness with hay poking through the blankets, and Eli's warm weight against her side, and Cole's hand finding hers across the boy's sleeping form. Through the barn doors left open to the night, she could see stars scattered across the sky like thrown diamonds. No regrets? Cole's voice was quiet, careful. Lena thought about the path that had brought her here. The advertisement, the letters, the money lost, the empty platform. The terror of being stranded, every moment of fear and doubt and desperate hope that had led to this barn, this family, this life. Not a single one, she said. Cole's fingers tightened around hers. Me neither. They stayed there until the cold drove them inside, carrying Eli between them, tucking him into his own bed before retreating to theirs. In the darkness of their room, Cole pulled Lena close, and she went willingly, fitting herself against him like she'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I know I haven't said it enough, but I do. I love you. I love you too." The words came easily, naturally. "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe enough to say that to anyone, but I do. I love you and Eli and this life we're building. All of it." They fell asleep tangled together, and Lena's last thought before sleep took her was that she'd finally found what she'd been looking for all along. Not a man to rescue her, not a romantic fantasy of frontier life, just honest partnership, genuine love, and a place to belong. The winter that followed was hard in the way all Wyoming winters were hard. Cold that cut to the bone, snow that piled in drifts against the barn, days where venturing outside meant risking frostbite. But the house stayed warm. Lena cooked and mended and kept the stove going. Cole tended the animals and fixed what broke and made sure they had enough wood cut to last until spring. Eli grew like a weed, his legs getting longer, his face losing some of its baby softness. They fell into rhythms. Morning coffee shared before the work began. Evening meals at the table, Eli's chatter filling the spaces between adult conversation. Nights when Lena and Cole would sit by the fire after Eli was asleep, talking through plans for spring planting, for expanding the herd, for the life they were building together. Sometimes Lena thought about Silas, locked away in the territorial prison. Thought about the other women he'd hurt, wondered if they'd found their own versions of healing. She'd received letters from both Catherine and Ruth. Catherine had opened a seamstress shop in Denver and was doing well. Ruth had met a farmer at her church and was cautiously allowing herself to hope again. The women had survived. They'd adapted. They'd refused to let one man's cruelty define their entire futures. Lena had done the same. Only she'd gotten lucky enough to find not just survival, but joy. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, but it came. The snow melted. Green returned to the land. Lena's garden burst into life, producing more than they could use, so she started preserving and trading with neighbors. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, Cole's experience and strength, Lena's organization and determination. In April, Lena discovered she was pregnant. She told Cole one evening while they were checking on the new calves, standing in the barn with the smell of hay and animals all around them. He went very still when she said the words, then turned to her with an expression of such pure, overwhelming joy that she started crying. "You're sure?" he asked, his hands hovering near her waist like he was afraid to touch her. "I'm sure. 3 months along, I think. Maybe more." Lena put her hands over his, pressed them against her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Cole laughed, a sound caught between tears and wonder. "Lena, I thought I was done. Thought Eli would be my only child and I'd made my peace with that. But this..." His voice broke. "This is a gift I never expected." They told Eli that night. His reaction was immediate and ecstatic. He wanted to know when the baby would come, whether it would be a brother or sister, if he could help take care of it. His excitement was so genuine, so untainted by jealousy or fear, that Lena felt another piece of her heart settle into place. This child would be born into love, into stability, into a family that had been broken and rebuilt itself stronger. The baby, a daughter they named Clara Rose, arrived in September on a morning when the aspens were just starting to turn gold. The birth was hard, but uncomplicated, attended by the doctor from town and Mabel, who'd insisted on being there. When it was over and Lena held her daughter for the first time, she looked into that tiny, scrunched face and felt the final pieces of her old life fall away completely. She wasn't the desperate woman who'd stepped off a train in Ridgehaven anymore. Wasn't Silas Creed's victim, or the abandoned bride, or even just Cole Hart's wife. She was Lena Hart, mother and partner and beloved member of a community that had claimed her as one of their own. Cole sat on the edge of the bed, Eli pressed against his side, both of them staring at the new baby with identical expressions of awe. "She's perfect," Eli whispered. "Can I touch her?" "Gently," Lena said, guiding his small hand to Clara's head. "See? She's your sister. You're going to help take care of her." "I will," Eli promised solemnly. "I'll be the best big brother ever." Watching her family, her husband, her son, her daughter, Lena felt a completeness she'd never imagined possible. The journey here had been painful and terrifying and full of moments where she'd nearly given up. But every hard step had been worth it for this moment, this family, this life. That evening, after Eli had finally been convinced to go to bed, and Clara was sleeping in the cradle Cole had built for her, Lena and Cole sat together in the rocking chair by the window. She was exhausted, sore, and happier than she'd ever been. "Thank you," Cole said quietly, "for staying, for choosing us, for building this with me. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." Lena leaned her head against his shoulder. "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for offering partnership instead of rescue. Is it what you hoped for when you came west?" Lena thought about that, about the fantasies she'd built around Silas's letters, about the version of frontier life she'd imagined. None of it had been like this. The reality was harder and better and more complex than anything she could have dreamed. "It's nothing like what I hoped for," she said honestly. "It's so much more." Through the window, she could see the mountains going purple in the twilight, could see the barn where they'd slept on their wedding night, the garden she'd planted, the land they worked together, could see in her mind's eye the future stretching out ahead of them, years of work and struggle and joy, of children growing and seasons changing and love deepening into something unshakable. She'd come to Ridgehaven broken, and the town had helped put her back together. Not into her old shape, but into something new, something stronger. The broken bride of Ridgehaven had found her home at last, and it was everything a home should be: imperfect, hard-won, and absolutely worth fighting for. Outside, the first stars were appearing. Inside, Clara made a small sound in her sleep, and Eli called out that he couldn't sleep because he was too excited about being a big brother. Cole kissed Lena's temple and stood to deal with their son, and Lena sat in the rocking chair watching her family with a heart so full it felt like it might overflow. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, but the one she'd earned through courage and stubbornness, and the willingness to stay when running would have been easier, and she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.